Hello everyone and welcome to Plane Time with Ben Coleman. I'm your primary host here. I say primary because we have two hosts today. Florida Aviation Network coming to you live and in the clear from the Orlando studios, and we are so glad to be here. And it's a beautiful Saturday morning here in Orlando. We have all of our volunteers here working diligently to bring this program to you, and this is all maintenance and safety related. However, we've got a little twist today. We're going to be talking maintenance with a kind of a very long duration maintenance trip that we're going to develop with you. And I'm going to introduce our co-host here, Ron Timmermans. Ron.
Good morning, Ben. And it's good to be with you. So my first time being with you on Plane Time and getting into the maintenance aspect of what we do on broadcast. So I'm delighted to be here.
Well, now that you mentioned that, this is the first time, and we are going to kind of twist and weave the maintenance aspect in with an operational aspect. And you have something going on with an operations an operation that took place, I think, earlier this year. Tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind, Ron.
You're talking about my visit to Oshkosh and my interview with Ben?
Your visit to Oshkosh, but more important than that, did you have any maintenance problems going to Oshkosh?
Oh, okay. So actually, my wife and I flew to Oshkosh in our Bonanza, and we were maintenance free for the whole trip. To Oshkosh, other places in Wisconsin, back home again, everything but an oil change. So it worked out just fine. No maintenance issues at all.
Did you run into any incorrigible folks along the way?
Well, let me think. Let's see. On the trip up, I was talking with ATC on an IFR flight plan, and I heard a familiar voice on the radio. And I asked the controller if the pilot of that aircraft could contact me on a discrete frequency. And lo and behold, it was you, Ben. And so you and I were chatting on a discrete frequency as we were both headed up to Oshkosh the weekend before the big EA AirVenture. That was a lot of fun.
It was. I was in Twin Technam November 5-3 Tango Whiskey, and Melody was with me. We were just pounding our way through the sky. Head north, and it was good to talk to you off frequency. And you know, the controllers got to give a good pat on the back to ATC. These folks, they work diligently to keep us separated, keep us safe, and they will work with you if you let them know what you want to do.
Exactly.
You talk to them, they'll talk back to you. If they can't, they'll say, "Hey, unable." But talk to the folks, and bear in mind, they're sitting there looking at the scope, listening to it talk. Every now and then, it's good to have a little diversion. Where it's, hey, you mind if I go off frequency? As a matter of fact, just a little side note, as a whole, on the way back, Jack Center, I was listening and I heard somebody say, Benji? And I was, okay, yeah. And Center, I'm not sure what's going on. So, Center, I just wanted to say hello to Ben. And it was one of my QB buddies that happened to be out doing some flying. And so it's a small world in aviation. But
Indeed.
Anyway.
And so we don't promote clogging up the frequency by extraneous talk. And that's why when I wanted to talk with Ben, I suggested a discrete frequency. There is a multicom frequency just for that purpose, 122.75, I believe. And so not everyone knows about that. So if you want to talk with someone discrete from ATC frequency, you can ask them to meet you on 122.75, and then you can converse as long as you need to. Also, always listening for ATC in case they give you a revised clearance or something.
Amendment to your clearance.
Amendment to the clearance, yeah.
And Ron, I do apologize. We're kind of getting sidetracked on what we're doing here today.
Yes, we are.
But you have something you want to show us that's very important.
I do indeed. So while I was at EA AirVenture at Oshkosh this year, it was my pleasure to interview for the Florida Aviation Network a young man who is a pilot from South Carolina and made a significant trip earlier this year. His name is Ben Templeton. And while we were at EA AirVenture, I had a chance to interview Ben, his father, and a mentor of his, Mr. Pat Hartness. We're about ready to roll that video interview now, so you'll get to see Ben, his airplane that he flew, and hear about his incredibly exciting and fulfilling adventure. So listen now to the interview. Hi, I'm Ron Timmermans, one of the many hosts with the Florida Aviation Network, and today I'm broadcasting live and in the clear from EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. You know, on my way here a couple of days ago, I flew over and stopped in several states along the way, and then after I've gotten here, I've talked with some other pilots from California and from Washington State and from Maine and from Texas and from Virginia. You know, and I suppose if we collected all of our flights together, we would find pilots had flown and stopped in every state along the way to get to AirVenture. But who I have here with us today is a young man who has stopped in every state and flown into every state in the lower 48, and he did so within a 2-month time frame and in a Piper Cub. I want you to meet Ben Templeton. Ben, good to have you with us on this broadcast.
Thank you for having me as well. My name is Ben Templeton, and I just completed a 48-state trip in TripleTree's J-3 Cub.
Very good. And so you started where, Ben?
I started from Woodruff, South Carolina at TripleTree Aerodrome and headed north. It was about a 40-day trip, and it was 7,700 miles and 140 hours of flying.
Wow, so you really built some time, Ben. So how many hours do you have total time?
My total time now, this trip and flying up to Oshkosh just put me over 500 hours.
So you're a 500-hour pilot now, and in the last 90 days, how many hours?
In the last 90 days, I've put a little over 200 hours total time.
Wow, so how's that for flying frequently and often? So 48 states in 40 days, that's just an amazing, incredible record, and so that's really quite something. So on your travels, what was one of the fun places that you stopped, or maybe 2 fun places that you remember?
There were several really cool airports that I liked. One of the fun flights was going up the Hudson River and through the corridor there. And one of my favorite airports I stopped at was 19 Whiskey Alpha. It was Keyway, Washington. It's a grass strip. That was one of my favorite airports along the way.
And that's in Washington State, I trust.
Yes, it's on the River Gorge there.
Okay, and the river flight that you mentioned going up to New York, that was right alongside of New York City, is that correct?
Yes, it was. I was about 1,000 foot going up the Hudson, and I circled the Statue of Liberty, and that was just the VFR corridor there.
Okay, so we're going to be interrupted a time or two by aircraft flying over for the air show this afternoon. So we'll take a short pause until they get by, and then we'll continue again. So that's great. So tell us about the J-3 Cub. How old is it, and how long have you been flying it?
It's a 1947 J3 that EAA was actually bought from the EAA a couple years ago, and it's been TripleTree Aerodrome since then. And this Cub, I've been flying it. I actually sold it on my 16th birthday, and I've been flying it ever since up till now, and just flew it up here last weekend.
Well, great, and we'll have some pictures of the Cub all around, and I see that there's names printed all over the Cub. Tell us about the names.
The names are all the sponsors for the trip and everybody who supported before the trip and during the trip, and people on the tail, you can't see now, but the tail is full of signatures of everybody who signed for each state during the Cub and everybody that I met and knew along the way.
So also with me is Ben's father, Rob Templeton. And Rob, it's good to have you with us here at Oshkosh.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, good. So I know it was probably a bit traumatic for you and your spouse when you saw Ben take off. Tell us about your thoughts and feelings at the time.
Well, I knew he had the skill to do it, and he's certainly proven that. His mother was a little nervous, as could be expected, but she became his flight follower along the way, calling ahead and making sure he had a place to stay and fuel at the airport. So she did a fine job at that as well.
Very good. So he had a team back at Woodruff, South Carolina to help him, huh?
He did.
Well, that's great. And then one other very important person from Woodruff, South Carolina, that's Pat Hartness. Pat, you're the one who actually built TripleTree Aerodrome, I understand, and the inspiration behind, one of the inspirations behind Ben's flight. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, sir. I'm Pat Hartness, and I've had a love for doing aviation, and TripleTree has been one of the top joys of my life, putting it together.
Very good. So I've had the opportunity to interview Rob Williams from TripleTree a couple months ago, and so he told me all about you and about TripleTree, and I can't hardly wait to get there and see it myself at one of your events coming up this year. So I know that you do a lot for aerospace education for young people. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently.
Well, currently we use a lot of RCs to get the young people to fly, and if they have a really desire to fly, we know quickly from the RC. That's how I met Ben Templeton, and Ben is one of our stars and one of the people that we're most proud of. Ben, thank you. And That's what we're looking for, the passion, the love, and we can help expand the passion for aviation. That's what Triple Tree needs to do, and that's our mission.
Very good. So RCs are radio-controlled aircraft, and so if you find somebody that's interested and has a passion for it and is successful at it, then you'll have them graduate to flying the actual airplanes. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Everybody that solos the RC, we take up in our air cam. Once they know pitch, yaw, and roll and feel the stick in the air cam, they say, I can fly, and that's what we want to hear. And when we hear that, we know that the passion is building.
Very good. And so how many young people do you think you've introduced to aviation over the years, Pat?
Probably 15 or 20, but we're just beginning, and the pandemic, it's not been our friend, but we're going to be on fire to go back and expand and excite the passion for us to do our best.
Very good, I'm sure. And when's the next big event at Triple Tree where we can all come and see you?
We have one in October and we have one in September. One is RC. We're 50% RC and 50% full scale. In September, we have the RC, and then in October, we have the RC other event.
Very good. So some events coming up in Triple Tree. That's Sierra Charlie 00. If you're looking for it on ForeFlight, you should be able to find it and find your way there for one of the events. And the website is TripleTree TTA.aero. So that's the website for it. So that's great. Well, we'll see you, I'm sure, Rob, there. And Pat, I know you'll be there for the next event. And Ben, I imagine you'll be there as well. Oh, by the way, Ben, tell me, along your flight, if you had it to do over again, would you do anything different to make it an even safer flight than it was for you?
No, the flight was pretty safe. We had plenty of safety gear packed along. I would do maybe shorter days to keep from staying so tired, but it all worked out and everything went well flying.
Yeah, well, that's great. And so, Ben, 18 years old now, just graduated from high school a few months ago. Actually, you left on the day of graduation, and did you skip out on graduation?
I did. I did not walk at graduation. I went and flew airplanes.
Well, that's certainly indicative of your passion. So what happens next after you've done this flight? What's in your future in the near future?
Next for me is I get back from Oshkosh and move straight to college. I'm going to Middle Georgia State University down in Cochran, Georgia. I'll be there for 4 years, and I'd like to either fly corporate or airlines, hoping to fly for Delta one day and get some time built up.
Very good. So on to the airlines or corporate. Well, I'm sure your future is going to be just fabulous. So, well, thanks for joining us today, folks. My name is Ron Timmermans. I'm with the Florida Aviation Network, and we're broadcasting live and in the clear from EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh 2021. My guests, Ben, Rob Templeton, and Pat Hartness. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you on the next interview.
Well, that was about 3 weeks ago when I was at EAA AirVenture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. What a great time that was for thousands of people that were there and all the pilots that flew in, and had a chance to greet each other again after missing AirVenture during 2020. It was great to be back again, and it was my delight to interview Ben Templeton, his father, and his mentor Pat Hartness during that interview that you just saw. But today we have Ben Templeton with us live, or at least sort of live. We expected that Ben could make it here for this plain time interview today. However, logistics prevented him from coming. The next best thing with today's modern technology, we have zoomed in to his dorm room where he is in Georgia, and he's joining us live and in the clear via Zoom. So Ben Templeton, thank you for joining us again today. We've got more things that we want to ask you about your historic trip and your background and your future and the like, and so we're looking forward to chatting with you more at this time. And Ben Templeton, I want to introduce you to my colleague, another Ben, who we'll call Benji Coleman. And so Benji has a few questions for you and is pleased to meet you as well. Benji?
Hello, Ben. And Ben, I'm going to just talk with you and ask you. This is the most important question I have for you. Right behind your head, if you go back to that shot, is that "Come Home, Ben" or "Welcome Home, Ben"? Welcome home. I thought you had been out wandering around in the country and said, "Ben, where are you? Please come home." No, I'm going to stay in California. or I'm going to stay in Washington, I'm going to stay in Arizona. But Ben, your trip is a phenomenal trip, and with all the things going on this day and age, there's a lot of could be considered doom and gloom, and there's a lot of bad stuff happening out there, but there's some good stuff happening out there too. That's the reason we want to develop. Why did you embark on this trip? Whose idea was it? And did you have any problems along the way?
So this trip was it was Pat Hartness's idea to do the trip. He sat down at lunch one day and proposed the idea, and we kind of went with the idea of the trip. We did it to promote general aviation, promote youth in aviation, and trying just to almost really just kind of do it, just prove that people can fly, get out and fly. And there's nothing holding you back if you want to go do something and prove to people that general aviation is out there for everybody to start flying.
And any problems along the way? I mean, challenges? I mean, the weather was always perfect. You always had plenty of fuel. The wind always cooperated with you. You always were able to land right into the wind. Tell us a little bit about your trip.
Yeah, so we didn't have many mechanical issues at all. The airplane, we did a very extensive annual and a bunch of work before, so that all was pretty good the whole trip. I did some oil changes along the way. The weather, we had surprisingly great weather throughout the whole trip. There was several days I had to stay in some states, but other than that, we did good. I went around most of the weather I had to. Didn't get caught in any weather, thankfully. We had some strong winds out in the Midwest. It's always windy out there. I had some 30 and 35 knot winds, but I just focused on flying the airplane and getting it back on the ground. And the wind was never too big of an issue. Some days I had to sit out a couple hours and wait on wind. But there was not many issues with the airplane at all throughout the whole trip. It ran fine, and we got lucky with the airplane, all the work we had put in before leaving for the trip.
And Ben, by the way, we are getting wings credit for this. The FAA has seen that our communications here is worthy of getting some credit for to advance your pilot certificate and in form of your flight review. So pay attention at the end of this presentation. There's a code that you have to put in to go into the computer and to get credit for this. But you mentioned that you changed oil. Can you just change oil on your own, Ben, or what are the rules that apply to changing your oil on your aircraft?
For changing oil on an airplane, it falls under preventative maintenance. So a private pilot or anybody with higher rating than a private pilot can do that. You simply change oil per the handbook for the airplane or whoever stakes out the rules, and you write the times and the dates and your number and name in the logbook, and you are perfectly legal to keep flying. For our plane, it's got a screen, so it's the next 25 hours until you have to change it again.
So if you wanted to look up anything on that, that would be FAR 43 Appendix A, Subpart C, maybe?
I think it's subpart B or C, yes. Preventative
Okay,
maintenance.
that's good. That's good. Don't go on memory. Always look it up. And and Ben, the only way that I would really feel comfortable embarking on a trip like this behind a little Continental is if Don Wade had anything to do with this. Did Don have anything to do with this?
Yes, a couple weeks before the trip, we took the motor off the Cub, and I actually trailered it down to Don's Dream Machines down in Bessemer, Alabama. They did a full overhaul. They put new jugs, everything. We had Millennium cylinders on it, and it ran throughout the whole trip. Never had a single emergency landing because of the engine, and everything was fine with the engine the whole time. Made plenty of power. We still had the original wood prop on it, and that did fine throughout the whole trip as well.
And how about your power generation for that little engine? There's two little power generators back there. What did that have to do with anything?
Yeah, we had Champion mags, plugs, and wires. They had donated all that for the trip just because they thought it was a good trip and wanted to promote it. So we had brand new mags, plugs, and wires thanks to Champion.
Well, and that just goes to show you, Ben, that there's a lot of people out there that really encourage this type of activity. And if you want to get involved in aviation, there's the best way to do it is kind of get involved. Anything to add to that, Ron?
Yeah, I think it's always great when we have youth that embark on a significant journey like this to show that aviation isn't just for the old, experienced, gray-haired folks like you and me, Benji. It can be accomplished safely by young people as well. And what a thrilling adventure it must have been for Ben to make these, I think you said 107 stops, Ben. That was just incredible. If I could, I'd like to explore just a bit more about the places that you stopped along the way, or interesting places over which you flew. During the interview at Oshkosh, you mentioned the so-called Hudson River corridor. Now, as I recall, this is the Hudson River that runs along the west side of New York City, and you actually flew right alongside New York City over the Hudson River. Is that correct?
Yes, I landed down south of New York, and there's a VFR corridor. You can go right through New York, in between New Jersey, right down the river. I was about 1,000 foot, and there's just a frequency that you make just calls at different locations, and I circled the Statue of Liberty and flew all the way down the river. And I was 18 years old, thinking I'm doing the coolest thing I can do in an airplane now, so what's next?
Indeed. Well, that was early part of your trip, so that was certainly a major accomplishment, and but many more to come on this, what was it, 35-day journey that you had throughout the United States. And this was early on in the journey. You left South Carolina and flew north along the coast and through the New England states, and so this was early on in your journey. Is that correct?
Was I think 2 or 3 of the trip.
Yeah. So I want to put it in perspective again for our viewers. So you were flying alongside New York City, probably maybe 2 miles from the skyscrapers, or at the most 2 miles to the west of it, at about 1,000 feet MSL. So you were actually at an elevation lower than the tall skyscrapers that were to the east of you. Is that correct?
Yes, here I was below much of the buildings, and basically flying down the east side of the river. So I was really close to New York and well below the buildings, and it's perfectly legal to go through there.
Yeah, so this attests to the actual freedoms that we have of flying in this wonderful country, that we can fly in such a beautiful environment and safely, and do it with the freedoms that many other folks in other countries don't enjoy like we do. Well, that's great. So from there, then you went on up through the New England states, as I recall, Ben, and when you were in the state of Maine, you actually made a little diversion out over a body of water so that you'd give some authenticity to your trip. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was in San Pete, at a little restaurant, and I looked, and the coast was 7 miles away. So I went and flew out over the coastline. So the trip we fly over the Pacific, and I would have been coast to coast over both oceans, and
indeed,
all
and
48
in so
states.
doing, flying over the Atlantic Ocean and then later on over the Pacific Ocean, as I recall, you duplicated something happened in this very airplane with Pat Hartness's stepson 20 years earlier. Is that correct?
Yes, Pat's stepson Ryan Miles was doing the same thing I was, trying to job flying. So he took the Cub from coast to coast in 1999, and that was a couple-week journey for him.
So this
as well.
airplane has an interesting history behind it, and whether you were in the airplane or the other gentleman, it was no big deal for the airplane. It just knew how to fly, and with a new engine or a newly overhauled engine, it did well for you. So after Maine and the Atlantic Ocean, you headed to the west, up through the northern part of the United States, with a special stop in Pennsylvania. Where was that?
Yeah, I stopped in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. That's the home of Piper Aircraft. So it was kind of, we missed Sentimental Journey by a while, but it was fun to see the airport and the factory where the Cub came out of, and it had one takeoff from there in the logbook somewhere long ago, back in 1947.
Yeah. Okay, good. So you stopped in at the home of Piper Aircraft, probably where this very J-3 Cub was manufactured some 60 years ago or more, actually 70 years ago, I guess. We're going to pause just for a moment for a technical issue here, just a quick pause.
No, the pause, actually, the technical issue is Lock Haven, Pennsylvania is the home of the Cub.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
Yeah, that's we call it Cub Haven every year. And Ben, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to go there, but Sentimental Journey, you need to make that put that on your bucket list.
Yeah, I was hoping to make it, but we missed it by a few weeks. We're a little early.
Okay, but anyway, it was a great stop anyway, and perhaps the J-3 Cub that you flew, November Charlie 88073, felt right at home when you landed there, I imagine. And then on further west, you said earlier when we were chatting about some strong headwinds through the Midwest, which are typical and to be expected. Were these 30 and 35 knot headwinds or tailwinds or crosswinds for you?
I didn't have a crazy headwind. Some days I had headwinds, but it was just a lot of just constant winds. Most of them were crosswinds out through the Midwest flying. So it was just kind of you just deal with the wind and you keep flying through it.
Very good. So I imagine you got a chance to work on your crosswind landing techniques. Would you say you're pretty good at crosswind landings in that Cub now?
In the Cub, I would like to think I can land it in a pretty good crosswind, because you're landing at some airports, there's nothing around, and you have to land the airplane there. So you're going to fly the airplane all the way to the ground.
So mostly wheel landings or three-point landings in the Cub for you, Ben?
I like the wheel landing. It's a little more of a challenge. It's easier in the wind, but it's more of a challenge to make it a smooth landing than just holding it back to a full stall. So I usually do a wheel landing.
Very good. And I forgot to ask you, the airports that you landed at, I'm sure there were some grass strips and some paved strips. What was the mix? Mostly grass or mostly paved?
Most of them were paved, just uncontrolled airports with fuel, but a lot of them had grass strips that were unmarked or a parallel grass strip that I landed in, and we had looked that up before, so it was much nicer to land on grass sometimes, but a lot of it was asphalt landings.
So does that mean you'd prefer grass strips to paved strips, or is it about either way?
Grass strips are always more fun in the Cub. It's a lot easier to land a tailwheel on grass strips, many of y'all know, but it's more of a bare bones flying, landing on grass and anywhere you can land.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Let me jump in here just for a second here, Ben. Two things, one a technicality and one a curiosity. Technicality, there are no such things as uncontrolled airports. If you tell somebody that don't fly that we're flying into an uncontrolled airport, oh my God, it's out of control. Is it not safe? It's a non-towered airport, but we all use the term uncontrolled. We understand that as pilots, but the general public may not be too comfortable with uncontrolled. But this is the aspect that you're 18 years old. How much total time did you have, Ben, before you started and embarked on this trip? Total time flying.
Total time, I had a little over or right at 300 hours total flying between several different airplanes, and before I left on this trip. And with the trip and a lot of flying after the trip, I'm right about 500 hours now.
That's encouraging, and that's to let us know that you don't have to have thousands of hours to be able to embark off on a trip, because that little airplane doesn't know when you fly 1 hour and keep hopping 1 hour, you can keep adding 1 hour and 1 hour, and you can fly all the way around the world and back.
Indeed. So Ben, returning to your trip and some of the interesting places that you stopped along the way, I recall you said to me in a private conversation something about an air museum somewhere in the middle of Minnesota. Can you tell us about that one?
Yes, I made a stop at the Fagan Fighter World War II Museum in Granite Falls, Minnesota. It's in the middle of the fields in Minnesota. If you haven't heard about it, you won't stumble across it, but it's a great airport. They've got a huge collection of fighters and a bunch of World War II memorabilia, tanks and everything, but I like their fighter collection and bombers as well. And they had me for a day out there. I spent the night, and they did some flying on some airplanes, including P-38s and P-40s. They just have a massive collection of fighters as their hobby, and they like to promote it to the general public around Granite Falls to come out and watch them fly each weekend.
Wow, that was a great stop for you, I'm sure, and very fulfilling. I forgot to ask you, along the way on your journey, when you stopped, did you camp out at the airports that you stopped at? Did you stay in a hotel? Did you stay with friends or people that you met along the way? What kind of accommodations did you have on your 30-some days on the road?
90% of the time, I stayed at the airport, at the FBO. A lot of people were very helpful and let me stay on the couches in FBOs or either their own tea hangers out the airport. I stayed in a tent a few nights. I had a few hotels along the trip, but most of it was just staying at the airport in the FBO.
Wow, well, that's great. So then, heading west from Minnesota, from your stop there, you eventually had some mountains to cross on your way to the West Coast. What path did you take through the Rocky Mountains?
I followed Interstate 90 and the river that runs all the way through the Rockies to the north. I picked it up around Sheridan, Wyoming, and took it all the way to Portland, Oregon.
That's good. That's a wise idea, so that if there was an emergency and you needed to put the airplane down somewhere, you at least had some pavement underneath you and hopefully a long straight path to land at, although that comes with some challenges itself. But that's what a lot of pilots do going through the mountains their first few times, is follow a road, an interstate highway, so that worked out good. And then you got eventually all the way to the state of Washington, and again, I recall you said you had a very favorite spot that you stopped in Washington.
Yeah, I stopped at an airport in Stevenson, Washington, right on the river gorge there. It's called Keyway. It's 19 Whiskey Alpha. It was by far probably one of my favorite airports I've ever landed at here, along with Triple Tree. It's an airport cut in the side of a mountain. It's one way in, one way out, real steep grass strip, and the family, the Haffords, own it, Jay and Theo. They've got several old cabins out there and some stuff, and they hosted me for the weekend, and we flew around in their Satabria and just had a great time there. And it was one of my favorites. I'd never seen anything like it there. I've never been out west, and just taking off right over the Columbia River Gorge was just pretty amazing out there.
That is a beautiful country to fly over. I've had the opportunity to do that myself, and it is truly stunning, breathtaking terrain over which you can fly. And then on eventually to California. And did you meet any famous pilots or anything while you were on this trip, Ben?
I did. I was lucky enough. A lot of y'all watching might have seen Julie Clark fly a T-34 at air shows all around the country. She had reached out and invited me to stay at her house in Cameron Park, California for the weekend. So I went there and stayed there overnight, and we hung out there, talked about flying, looked at all her airplanes. She's got a Bonanza and her T-34 have been flying air shows. And that night we flew over to another airport close by, and I got to talk at an EAA chapter, and they all knew her very well.
I can imagine. So what did you speak about at the EAA chapter?
I had just talked about my trip and how everything was going, and a lot of people just had questions about why you're doing it, what you're doing it for, and how you're doing it.
Great. And since you've returned, have you had the opportunity to speak at various EA chapter meetings or wing seminars or any other events?
I haven't talked to EAA chapters yet, but I've done a lot of interviews and talked to people at the airport, and a lot of interviews at Oshkosh. People were curious about the trip, which was fun to talk about to people.
Indeed, and you do well during these interviews, by the way, Ben. You're very easy to talk to and very skilled at public speaking. I'm very proud of you in many ways. So then, leaving California, you went back through the Southwest, as I recall, Arizona, New Mexico, and a little foray into California, as well as Texas and Oklahoma. Any stops there that are significant for you?
I had one of the stops. I went up to the Hoover Dam and also stopped in Vegas. I'd never been there. I wanted to see what it was about and just go once in my life. And my family, my mom and dad, and a few friends flew out and met me there, and we stayed there for a few days, and then I kept headed east.
Very good. So what airport did you land at in Las Vegas?
I landed at Henderson Executive, just south of Las Vegas. It's a Class D, and they were kind of confused on me coming in there. Everything else was jets and an extra given rides. So when they heard me with handheld radio, no ADSB, it was kind of a shock to them, but we got in there no problem.
So you did have a handheld radio for your trip, is that correct? And you used it occasionally?
I did. I had a handheld. It didn't transmit or receive very far, but I did have some sort of radio to talk to people.
That at least facilitated you getting into a few Class D airports like at Henderson. That's good. But no electrical system on the J-3 Cub, so no transponder, no ADSB in, no ADSB out. Did you have an iPad with you by chance?
I had an iPhone with ForeFlight, which helped tremendously through the whole trip, and I also had a Garmin Era 660 handheld GPS, and I just had a little battery that ran those during the day, and that's how I navigated everywhere. Well, a lot of it was just looking out the windows and flying.
Very good, very good. So then from the great Southwest, Texas and Oklahoma, you made your way back towards South Carolina, is that correct?
Yes, I flew through Oklahoma, Missouri, and then headed down towards Florida. I touched Florida right beside Pensacola airport called Ferguson. And there was a couple of people I met along the way in there. The Mosleys, they own John's 360s, and they've actually coated the airplane at Oshkosh. And I made a stop at Don's Dream Machines just to look over the engine and see how everything was running, and then headed back towards Triple Tree.
Very good. And what what day did you land at Triple Tree?
I landed July 5th at Triple Tree. It was a Monday, and I had a huge crowd of people out there I didn't expect to welcome me home.
Isn't that wonderful? By chance, did they have fire engines shooting the water cannons over your airplane as you taxied in, or did they not make
They
that big
did not.
a deal? Okay. Very good, very good. Well, that was, Ben, it's just amazing, and a journey of a lifetime, one that my colleague Benji and I are both envious of you for having been able to do. It's been great to hear about your adventure. This is just absolutely incredible. And so, Benji, I think you had a couple more questions or thoughts you wanted to explore with Ben, is that correct?
Ron, you don't know me very well. If you know me well, you know I always have questions, and I can talk to Ben about something. And Obi Young, he's about to pass out back there. He said, Ben, don't get into the weeds. We're getting into the weeds here, Ben. Ben, your trip was really an adventure. And before you, I mean, all the hype that was talked about, discussed, I'm sure that there was an awful lot of maybe a little bit of anticipation, a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of do I really know what I'm doing here? But you know, once you start the trip and you get involved with it, you realize, wait, this is really not as hard as I thought it was. But it does take the determination to want to climb back in that airplane, and you are a little fella. You're only 18 years old, so you got to be small.
Yeah,
That's your segue to tell me how tall you are.
yeah, I'm 6'5", 210 pounds, and if you've flown a Cub, anybody over 5'5" does not fit well in a Cub. So we had to make it work along the way, and it apparently worked out pretty well.
Well, at this, one of my bucket list things as we look at you standing in front of your aircraft there is I would love to see you fold up in the front seat.
I have never flown a Cub. I've flown about 4 different Cubs. I've never flown one from the front seat, and I've never sat in the front seat, but I just cannot physically get my body in there.
Well, I have another challenge when I get my Interstate Cadet. Are you familiar with the Interstate Cadet?
I am.
I do have an Interstate Cadet 1941 that I would love to have you fly someday, but you will not fit in the front of that airplane because they were not built for our normal size people I call these days. I don't know too many folks that weigh 170 pounds other than Bob Nacero over on Camera One. But the aspects of the maintenance is really got me intrigued because typically that's one thing that would make folks kind of shy away from making a long trip in an antique aircraft with a lot of old technology. And it's just amazing that the comfort level that you have of knowing you go to power, that it's going to be there for you. And after a while, you get tuned in and you can actually feel every spark going to that plug, and you know when it's talking to you and about to give you a little bit of a problem to give you a chance to land. I know we've been focusing on your trip, most recent adventure across the country. Have you had any maintenance issues where you've had either some lack of comfort or made a precautionary landing or something of a maintenance issue that just didn't go right?
We had pretty good plane did good the whole trip. I had a few times where it was just hot and I was climbing really hard and the oil temperature got up a little high. So I let it cool off one time because it wasn't cooling off. And that was engine ran good. I had confidence in through the mountains. You learn to hear the engine and everything happening once you fly it for 200 hours. So I was confident in that. In the airplane, we had done an extensive amount of work and just making sure the airplane was sound and ready to go for the whole trip before as well.
And you know, Ben, when you mentioned it got hot, and you can make sure you can see temperature, your oil temperature gauge and so forth, but something that you can't really put in a book and you can't explain it to anybody is, what does it smell like sitting behind one of those engines when it gets hot? There's a certain aroma that gets your attention and makes your antennas go up and put you on high alert.
Yeah, for sure. Flying the Cub with the doors and windows open, you can definitely smell the engine, and you can instantly smell when it gets too hot to be flying. You know to pull it back a little bit and let it cool off.
And that's something that we don't discuss a whole lot, but being able to fly with the doors open and the window down is a very, very unique experience. And anybody that says, well, I've never had a chance to do that, I probably never will, what prevents them from actually getting that experience, Ben? And coming from a young man, you can share something with all us old codgers that think, wow, that'd be nice to do someday. What's preventing them from doing it?
A lot of people want to go fast. You need to have your traveling plane and also your for fun knock around the house airplane. And a lot of people ask where you get the experience. And I just walked around airports and met people with old vintage airplane. That's vintage airplanes, and tailwheels are one of my favorites to fly. So I kind of stick around people who fly tailwheels, and you just learn through meeting people and getting experience.
Well, and that you used a term a little while ago about, I think, flying by the seat of your pants, but it really is, you feel the airplane, you know the airplane so well. And I'm sorry I keep looking down at you, but I should be looking at our audience. I apologize, but the Zoom technology that we're using these days is kind of interesting, but it's effective because we're able to hear you. There's a little bit of a time delay, and that way we kind of pause a little bit between conversations, but we're working it out. And Ron, I'm sure that you have a few more things that you'd like to develop that I have kind of piqued your interest.
You have, Benji. Thank you. And so, Ben Templeton, I wanted to ask a little bit about the personal aspects of you and your flying and the like. You've mentioned your parents. I had the opportunity to meet your dad, Rob Templeton, and understandably he had an influence on you, as did Mr. Pat Hartness, the visionary behind Triple-Tree Aerodrome. So you said that this idea of a cross-country in this J-3 Cub of this magnitude was dreamed up one day by, I think, the three of you. And so that night when you came home, did you pitch the idea to your mom, or did your dad, or how did you talk to your mom about this?
We had done a lot of planning before my mom ever knew about it, because we knew she'd be nervous. So we kind of had it set that we were going to do this trip before she knew, and then we told her. She was pretty nervous at first of how I'm going to get to Washington and back, but I just had to explain to her that I'm going an hour flight at a time. I fly 120 at home an hour at a time, and I make it back. So I was just going to go a long way 1 hour at a time.
Well, very good. Well, Mrs. Templeton, I'm assuming that you're watching this live stream, or at least a recording of it sometime. My hat's off to you, and I appreciate you letting Ben do this and have the confidence in your son that he could pull this off, which he certainly did with aplomb, and so that's great. And your dad has been an influence to you as well, and he's a pilot as well, as I recall. Is that right, Ben?
Yes, my dad, he's been flying since college, and I've been flying with him as long as I can remember. And he's one of the best pilots I've ever met. He can fly any airplane he's ever sat in and does it on the first try. So I learned from him, and he had confidence that I could do it, so I was pretty confident I could do it
And
as
so
well.
you had this great support network, and your mom and your dad, and your mom helping with the logistics of the trip. I mean, this was just absolutely wonderful for you, and took a lot of the pressure off of you, knowing that when you landed somewhere that there would be a place you could stay, that there'd be avgas available for you, or MoGas or whatever you use, and that you could be comfortable there and then move on again the next day or a couple of days later to the next adventurous spot. So that's great. I'm so glad you had that. Tell us a little bit about Pat Hartness and his influence on you and your flying career, Ben.
Pat, I started working at Triple Tree several years ago, and I hadn't started flight training or anything, and he saw me flying an RC airplane and asked me if I wanted to go fly the Cub. So I started flying the Cub with him and worked out there and flew all their airplanes, and then eventually Dad and I got involved with flying their airplanes, and he helped a bunch with the financials and also getting time for my private pilot's license. So I worked out there, flew their airplanes, and also flew at a flight school, and he's helped ever since that day with anything he can with aviation related, assist with me, and then I also helped him work on airplanes and get airplanes ready for him.
Well, very good. So that's been a good adventure for you, and so certainly a learning experience, I would imagine. So that's great. Okay, so let's see. That's some of the personal aspects I wanted to visit with you about. Benji, and I think you've got a question or two that you're considering.
I'm going to circle back to we talked about the maintenance issues that you had on this trip. However, Ben, when you first started from your solo flight on, have you had any situation that's come up where there has been either a maintenance question, issue, or something that you had to either end a trip soon or you weren't able to make a trip for? I mean, not just this particular adventure, but I'm talking about from the beginning of your flight training.
I've had no huge maintenance issues in the air. I've been pretty lucky with that so far. I've had some maintenance issues on the ground, and been lucky enough just to say, we're not going flying today, and we'll fix it and work on it later. Fouled out plugs, everybody's had fouled plugs. You pull it apart, clean them, and usually you're good to go. I've had some fuel pumps not work, and all this was lucky enough to be found on the ground or in the pre-flight, just make the call, and we're not going to be flying right now, and call the trip off if you have to.
Okay, how are you at flying gliders, Ben?
Flying gliders, I have an hour of glider time from a winch launch. I've never had an engine failure yet, so I've been pretty lucky with that. We practice engine outs all the time, but I've never had to do one in real life personally. Well,
that's where I was going to with this, is when can you most likely, and this I'm putting my FAA hat on again to cover up my oh, that does help on the glare, doesn't it? When can you most likely expect an engine failure?
Most likely it's going to be on takeoff when you're making full power and stressing the engine the most.
So in some cases, people say the first power reduction is when you're most likely to have, if you're going to have a problem. But where I'm digging into this is, when can you most likely expect an engine to fail?
It's going to fail when you're trusting it and not expecting it to fail, or when you run it out of gas.
I'm digging with you, Ben, and I'm in your corner, but anytime you can expect that engine to let you down. And that way, when it doesn't, you're just that far ahead. I guess that was, maybe that was a lead-on question. But it's not very often that we do have an engine loss of power. It's just not happening. That's why we have over 150% safety factor built into everything in these aircraft. And but there's new technology coming along, and we're going to be talking about that on another Plane Time show, where our diesel engines and our the Rotax engines are coming along in certified aircraft now, whereas before they have just been in the light sport primarily. But as a matter of fact, the airplane I flew to Oshkosh had a pair of snowmobile engines. I'm sorry, Rotax engines or Ski-Doo engines, but they run perfectly, and give us a very, very good trip up there and back. It's a lot of fun to fly. The hardest thing to get used to is starting them and stopping them. Have you flown behind a Rotax, Ben?
I have. I've got some air cam time with my dad, just dual receive. So we fly that around. That's got twin rotors on it. And they are different, but they run great and make plenty of power.
The hardest thing that I'm getting used to with the Rotax is starting them and stopping them. Because to start them, you hit a button and they roar to life. And to stop them, turn the ignitions off and they stop, just like that. So.
They're instant to the stop, which works just
And
fine.
again, it's just re-educating ourselves and reorienting our old man thoughts. And I was going to say earlier, and I wasn't, but I'm going to go ahead and do it now because I've already opened the door. I've got socks older than you, Ben.
I don't know how I could follow that comment, but I'll try. Let me change the subject just a bit from old smelly socks to other aircraft. So Ben, you've mentioned an air cam and obviously the J-3 Cub that you've flown. What other aircraft have you flown, and what would be your favorites?
Personally, our family, we own a Cessna 120, which is what I fly the most. That's what I've got most of my time in. Also, I've got a little bit more J3 time than 120 time, but that's my personal airplane. And also, Dad has an RV6A, so we fly that a good bit. And that airplane's just fun. It's snappy, it's quick. But the 120 is one of my favorites to fly. It's easy to fly, and I've got to know it so well. But my most favorite airplane I've ever ridden in is probably the Mustang at Triple Tree. That was just an incredible ride that not many people ever get to experience. That was fun to ride in that long.
Wow, in your young aviation career, you've had quite the experience, or quite the level of experience with a lot of different airplanes. So now as we speak with you today, Ben, you look like you're in a college dorm room. Is that correct?
I am. I'm in my college dorm. I started 2 weeks ago at Middle Georgia State University, so I'm here now doing homework and classes.
Interrupted only by this television interview today, huh?
Yeah, it's been good so far.
So tell us again about the major that you're pursuing.
I'm doing a Bachelor's of Science in Aviation Management. That's more for me to get a degree, to have the 4-year degree as a backup for hopefully flying for a living.
I see. So while you're at the university that you're attending now, will you be taking additional aviation training, or are you just academics now?
At the school, I'm academics. I'm not flying with the school, but I will be flying outside of school, doing my instrument, my commercial, my multi, all my ratings up to an ATP. So hopefully I'll get those knocked out and then start flying.
Okay, so that you'll do at a local airport near your university?
Yes, I'm just going to join a flying club somewhere, hopefully, and start doing my ratings.
Okay, well, you'll come with some specific experiences that will be beneficial for both to you and to the flying club that you're a part of, I'm sure. So I wish you the best. Next up is the instrument rating, and then following that with commercial, I imagine, and multi-engine perhaps after that?
Yes, that'd be hopefully get those knocked out within the next year, and then start working on everything higher than that, CFI and double I, and get my ATP sometime in the near future, hopefully.
That will be great. You got quite a load ahead of you. How many hours are you carrying this semester?
For school
College.
hours?
Yeah.
I'm doing 17 credit hours this semester.
Wow, what a load for a first year freshman. That's quite an endeavor. And then you're going to try and do some flying in addition to that.
I am, hopefully. I've got a T hangar down at the local airport, so once I get all my work done, I usually go out and fly for a little while.
Very good. Do you have the Cub there, or a different airplane to fly?
I have my Cessna 120, although I'd like to bring the Cub down on occasional weekends.
Okay, well, good. Well, I would just give you this caution: pace yourself. You've got a lot on your plate, and aviation is a great endeavor, and certainly for you a pastime. So concentrate, of course, on your academics and get through that, And that will be a great foundation for you. And eventually you hope to go to the airlines, is that correct? Or corporate flying,
Yeah.
or which?
My goal would be, I'd probably start with corporate just to build some turbine time. But my goal is hopefully to fly for Delta and stay around the Atlanta area and fly for the majors.
Well, that's great. Absolutely wonderful future awaits you, Ben. I'm so pleased for you and so happy that you were able to complete this historic journey, historic for you and historic for the J-3 Cub that you flew in second time around the United States for the J-3 Cub. It was quite an endeavor for sure.
Yeah.
And we're going to wrap this. We got about another 2.5 minutes to talk with you here, Ben. And I've kind of been similar in your shoes, but not completely in your shoes. I took a little Aronca Champ up from Vero Beach to Lock Haven when I moved up when I was working with Piper, and it's a long trip in a little airplane. And the last leg before I got out, it took me 2 days to make it. I don't know how to put this politely. Oh, I've got Obi's getting nervous now. Obi Young. Calm down, Obi. Calm down. But the last leg that you had when you made it back to Triple Tree, as much as you love the Cub, weren't you anxious to get out of that airplane knowing that you've completed your trip, you've completed your mission in your journey, and you didn't really look forward to climbing back in that airplane again for at least a day or two?
It wasn't necessarily that. It wasn't too bad. I flew the last leg home in a 4-ship formation with some of my friends from college. So we did a couple passes and landed. And the funny thing about that is actually I landed, we ate dinner, and then I got back in the Cub and gave rides to some kids that were out there. They were pretty interested. So I had about a 3-hour break, and I was back in the Cub flying it again.
Well, that just goes to be a testament of you are a true aviator when you climb out after a trip like that and still climb back into it to go. And it's I do extend a welcome to you down. Have you ever been to Sebring, Florida?
I have not been to Sebring. I've been down to Lakeland and Oshkosh, but I've never been to Sebring.
Well, I know somebody there that has access to a twin-engine Rotax-powered aircraft that I would welcome you to come and even in your long extended torso will fit comfortably in that little, it's called a P2006T. That is a twin Technim, yeah, but it's a very, very comfortable airplane. You would have to slide your seat forward once you get in to be able to reach the rudder pedals. So with your long legs, you'd still fit in that airplane good. So anyway, that's a welcome to you.
Well, that would be a first, sliding the seat. Sliding the seat forward would definitely be a first for me in an airplane.
Well, Ben, we would like to thank you for your time, and Ron Timmermans, our co-host here, with a little double wide shot coming up. Oh, he's saying, oh, there we go, double wide shot. Thank you so much for joining us here at the. And we do want to remind everyone that if you look at your screen and you take down this code, and I'll just go ahead and tell you the code. Did you get that? Okay. And we want to have fun with this, but it's a very, very serious business that we're in here. And Ben, I know you realize how important and serious it is, and that's why you're in your training and your environment, to learn as much as you can about an industry that has been a wonderful godsend for a lot of people, and there are some problems that we can help, that we can work through, and that's what we call safety. Don't forget to hang in for, we have a weather broadcast presentation following this broadcast, and we talk with Ben Templeton and his journey across the United States. What an adventure! And I do look forward to hearing more about this another one going kind of around the world. I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to do about that, Ben.
That would be fun to go around the world.
Okay, well, it's your world to go around, so you guys take it easy. And again, thank you for joining us here on the Plane Time with Ben Coleman here in Orlando, Florida Aviation Network, all of our volunteers, and and Obi Young, he feverishly puts this information out for us, and it's all in the interest of aviation safety. And we're passionate about it, and we try to have some fun with it, but it's a very serious business, and if you don't take it seriously, it will hurt you. So we need to remember that we're all about the weather. It's all about George Petuscus, and it's all about the weather. It's all about the weather. Thank you for joining us here on Plane Time. I'm Ben Coleman, your host. We'll see you at the next interview, and hang on for the weather presentation from George Petuscus.
Thank you all for a good day. Sounds good. Thank you.